Good morning. How y'all doing? Good, good. Welcome. It's taken us a long time to get here to Salt Lake City, thanks to our pandemic over the last few years. Really grateful that you're here. Happy that you're here. My name is Matthew Rodreick. I'm the executive director of Unite to Fight Paralysis. I am about a 6'3", 220-pound white man in a jacket. And if you're curious why I just did that, just to let you know that we are doing our best, as you can see with our interpreter, to address the wide array of disabilities from within our community. For those who are sight impaired or hearing impaired or paralyzed. So again, welcome. Before I say too much more, I'd like to welcome David Steinberg, who some of you met yesterday from the Craig H. Nielsen Rehabilitation Hospital at the University of Utah, who also happens to be a good part of the reason why we're here in Salt Lake City. So please welcome David.
Thank you. 6'2", brown hair, brown eyes, 196 pounds most of the time. So yes, I briefly just want to welcome you all to Salt Lake City, to Utah, to the Mountain West. Many of you have traveled far. It's been a few years of real challenge and struggle. When Matthew and I first met and talked about hosting Unite to Fight Paralysis and Work and Walk here, we didn't realize that it would take so long. So congratulations for everything that each and every one of you do, the passion and energy that you have, and the mission that you're on. Uniting to fight paralysis is critically important. Uniting around our shared common ground is how we will get things done. So welcome to Salt Lake City. Enjoy your time here. We ordered up some beautiful weather for you, and hopefully you'll all have some great companionship and lots of work to do to roll up the sleeves. So welcome. Enjoy your time.
Have a good day. Okay. So there's a few things I want to cover first, just some logistics for you all before we go too much further. Obviously, we've already talked about some of the provisions that we'll be providing, which are in many ways thanks to the Nielsen Foundation, who suggested that, one of our sponsors. And as I mentioned, the Nielsen Foundation, and you've seen some of the folks outside, I want to give a special thanks to the sponsors for this event to make it happen. You'll notice there are some folks that have like mine, except theirs is red and it says sponsors. And obviously there's some tables out there, but not all the sponsors have tables. So I'd like you to thank them when you see them, go out and visit them when you can, ask them questions as you see fit. But really it's because of them that we're able to be here and have this meeting. So do thank them. Also, thanks to our volunteers from NeuroWorks particularly. You'll see them moving around here as microphone shepherds and timekeepers. For those of you presenters, Emma's not going to be kind to you if you go over, and she's going to wave me down and I'll be less kind. So we can try to keep a tight agenda since I've already made us a few minutes late. You'll notice on the slides that will be, and I think in your program, if you've had any trouble getting on the Wi-Fi, you can find that in the program as well. We are, as you saw in the program, recommending that folks wear masks, but I can see how well that was received. We'll do what we can. Now, as to the meeting itself, a couple things I just want to say before we get started. We try to do something here historically in our meetings, which we think is a little bit unique, and it's the cross-section of the people that we have in the room. We really worked very hard to try to get folks from the community, the spinal cord injury community, involved in this meeting. And I think it would behoove you, if you haven't already done it in the program, our Sam Maddox, where is Sam? Right here, has written a piece in the program called Navigating the Symposium, trying to give you a little background on who's here, why they're here, why we asked them to be here, and what we hope to accomplish. If you haven't read that, I would encourage you to read that and think about it. Also, just as a sort of an aside, we did have a couple of scheduling challenges, and I see you've probably already seen it in your insert. Unfortunately, Jerry Silver's unable to be with us, and he's recovering from an illness. Also, Reggie Edgerton is unable to be with us, but he will be remotely presenting in Jerry's place later today. Thankfully, Wolfram Tetzlaff is going to present, who's from up in Vancouver at UBC. Is that right, Wolf? I don't know where you are. UBC, right? Okay, yeah. Thank you, Wolf, for filling in for Jerry. Very much appreciate it. Glad you were able to be here. And the other thing that's really important is we really want this meeting to be discursive. We've tried to afford plenty of time for discussion, for questions, the panel discussions, as you can see, built into the agenda. So we really, really want your participation. We will try to facilitate that and make it happen, but that's on you. If you have questions, if there's something you don't understand, if there's something that you do understand, but you think the way you understand it, there might be some folks in the room that don't, please try to express it or say it in a way that everybody in the room understands. We really want to have a very open conversation from all of us represented in the room. Make sense? Yeah, good. Okay. And if you have any questions aside from the agenda or from what's happening up here, asking questions, you can find me or anybody else who has this black staff and or board. We have some board members here, some staff members here. Any questions at all, chase them down, ask them. Okay? Sound good? All right. Y'all ready to go? Okay. Well, it just so happens I'm the first presenter. And I hope I do a good job. I'm doing something a little different today. I hope it shows up. Guys, there it is. So I've titled my presentation A Translational Wheel, a Reality Check. Translational wheel, for those who don't know, is usually the metaphor that's invoked to discuss how do discoveries become clinical practice? How does something in a lab become something that you get from your doctor, over the counter, under the counter, a procedure? How does that happen? And reality check, because really kind of two things, maybe a little play on words. One is, how do we perceive that translational wheel? How do we perceive that process, that discovery to clinical practice? And then also, how does science, and my screen just went black, gentlemen. How does science become real? I'm gonna try to do some things here. You see that? Okay. Try this again. Otherwise, we'll keep it in this little window. Okay. So, a couple of things I want to just mention first, introduce myself, and then this discussion of the reality of translation, or a discussion maybe of reality itself. And that's why I want you to bear with me a little bit while I'm doing something a little different. So first off, I already told you my name, Matthew. If you don't know, I'm the executive director at U2FP. I'm also father to this young man, Gabriel. It's my son. I put that picture up there because it's a picture I look at often. My son has a C5 injury. He's had it for 14 years. That's him doing what he loves at a club in Minneapolis, performing, singing. He's a great musician. I think of him as a genius, but he's my passion. He's what drives me as an advocate to do this work. but more specifically drives me to try to be strategic, try to be as efficient as possible because he deserves it. And frankly, anybody who is in this room who has a spinal cord injury deserves my best to be strategic and effective in the work that we do. But by extension, actually, I think everybody in this room deserves it. Everyone who's made a choice to be here, who's made a choice to do the work that you do, to care about the people in our community, to research things that would benefit people in our community, you all deserve that. So before I go further into this question of reality or discussion of reality, I wanted to define a couple of things real quickly. I consider U2FP, I consider myself an advocate, and I wanted to explain what I think that means. Raising awareness, bringing attention, drawing attention to the reality of spinal cord injury, bringing that to, and we're going to talk about today, mostly the system of research. Advocacy is sort of bringing this reality of our experience to the system of research. I also think of us as activists at U2FP. I think of myself as an activist, slightly different. I think of that, my definition of that is you go into the system to change or tweak so that it better reflects the reality of our experience. And I see us as doing both of those things. I just wanted to, I think it's helpful to understand as we continue, or as I continue to share with you this conversation. So all the years that I've been working in this space, I've been sort of reaching for a metaphor to describe that bringing our reality or adjusting systems reality to reflect us. I gave a presentation some years ago describing a roadmap. You've probably heard that many times. How do we get from where we are to cures for paralysis or restorative treatments for paralysis? I've given a presentation on a relay race. How do we think, could we think of this as a relay race? Who are the racers? What's the baton? Who hands off to who? How many people are in the race? How long is the race? Another metaphor. I've also looked at I've read a lot of systems analysis. If we think about this research system, how do we understand it in order to, again, bring our reality to it or make adjustments to that reality to better reflect, or that system to better reflect our reality? So in all these years of trying to search for a metaphor, along comes this meeting in 2019. Many of you who are in this space know. For those of you who don't, NIH put on a meeting in 2019. They called it SCI 2020, a decade of disruption. The question was bringing all these people together, researchers, clinicians, industry folks, like a lot of people, not everyone was there, but a lot of people were there to explore this question of how do we disrupt the system to make it work better, more efficiently, and so that in 10 years we get further along. I'll be honest with you, it was frustrating. Most of the meetings I go to are a little frustrating as an advocate and activist, but it was a good meeting and it stirred up a lot of things. And for me, there was a little bit of an epiphany because I think for U2FP and in all my work, there's this, which I've already described to you, this effort of how do we bring our reality to the systems and how do we go into the system to better reflect our reality. And it's always spinal cord injury focused. I'm a parent, I'm very passionate, like I've said. The epiphany that I had was, oh, and there's a little video there. It looks like it's not showing. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It was the epiphany GIF. Doesn't work as well for me to just describe it to you, but whatever. The epiphany was in that meeting, this recognition that it wasn't just us that we're trying to understand how our reality intersects with the system. It actually was everybody, researchers, clinicians, funders. Like there was a lot of question about, well, what is this system? What are the words that we use to describe it? It was kind of an epiphany, a recognition that it wasn't just us in the SCI community that were trying to figure out how do we bring our reality to it. Everyone was having that question. That led for us, for me, to an invitation to something I've talked about at U2FP. You may have heard About 3 years ago, I invited a number of scientists, clinicians, and SCI organizations to what we call the Translational Working Group. And it was asking this question about how do we understand this system? And is there, from the understanding of that system, a way to recommend a framework towards a shared goal of these realities, differing realities from differing perspectives? Historically, U2FP, I think, has been pretty good, and I credit my predecessors with two of those realities, which is this meeting was really designed, the genesis of it 17 years ago, was that our community need to have a better understanding of the science so that we could bring our reality to researchers. And I think we've done a fairly good job of it. Again, not a credit to me, but I think the genius of my predecessors and the founders of this organization. But frankly, it was and isn't enough for researchers to better understand spinal cord injury and folks with spinal cord injury to better understand the research. And so here's where I'm going to get a little weird for a minute. And I hope you'll bear with me. I started to, in this search for metaphors, I started to do a lot of reading, particularly about systems analysis. And I stumbled on this emergent field of cognitive neuroscience. And from that reading, I stumbled on this guy, a turn of the century biologist named Jakob von Uexküll. I think he's Lithuanian. You probably haven't heard of him because he was a racist, bigot, classist, aristocrat who then became a lover of Hitler. So he wasn't very popular in the 20th century. But I stumbled on this concept that he developed and wrote about called Umwelt. Well, if you're German, right? Environment, right? Yeah. Okay, so it's the German translation of environment, but Uexküll uses it very specifically as a biologist. And what he's saying is that the environment that an organism, an individual lives in, their reality, that reality they live in is determined, or even in a sense created, by their cognitive apparatus, their brain and senses. How they interact with the world they live in creates the reality that they live in. Kind of I hope you understand that. I hope you bear with me. Another way to say it is from this guy in the University of Cincinnati. Umwelt describes how the physiology of an organism's sensory apparatus shapes its active experience of its environment, or otherwise shapes its reality. Kind of a heady concept, but I think relatively simple if you stop. So think dogs and humans who occupy the same ecosystem, your house. Dogs have a much better sense of smell than humans. So how do they understand the reality of the house differently than you? I don't think they're watching Netflix like you are. And how they smell the house. Maybe they know when the garbage is ready to go out long before you do, right? Really simple. Dogs' perception of reality is very different than yours because of their sense of smell, and a whole other, because of their cognitive apparatus, but also your experiences. So let me ask you a question. Who's seen the movie Gone with the Wind? Or shout out if you can't raise your hand. Okay, a lot of you. But which Gone with the Wind? This Gone with the Wind? Or the documentary about Leonard Skinner? It's called Gone with the Wind. Or maybe even more less known, the 1954 Iranian film, Gone with the Wind. Probably didn't know about that one. You probably didn't know about the Leonard Skinner one. So when I say Gone with the Wind, you have an association, right? Because of your experience. But there's a lot more out there, potentially. If I said to you, who are the Black Panthers? What would you say? What would they represent? Racist Black group. Anything else? What if I said disability advocates? Any of you know the history of the early stages of the ADA? Anybody see Crip Camp? Good depiction of that. The early stages of the ADA may not have happened had the Black Panthers not delivered food every day to the federal courthouse where all the Crips or doing a sit-in, right? But again, your experience, your association determines your reality. How about able-bodied folks and people with SCI? When someone's paralyzed and they lose some of that sensory apparatus or it changes, and then me, as an able-bodied person with my son, our understanding of reality changes. Shared reality. So when at the SCI 2020 meeting, there were words thrown around like translation, like I started this out with, or neuroplasticity, or cure, the lightning rod word, or complete injury, or incomplete injury, or discomplete injury. These are words that people thought of differently based on their reality, their understanding, their experience, their maybe sensory apparatus. So what? It's kind of obvious, right? We all have a different, the way we're all in this room, the way you're all looking at me or hearing me or understanding me is different because you all live in a different reality. But what if we plug that into a research system, this notion of Umwelt? And I want to also stop really quickly to say that, and I'll say this again, when I use the word system a lot, but it's important that I define it as ecosystem. And there's a reason why, for me, when we use the word system, I think we humans tend to think system like natural order. You know, we think that things are as they should be. And when I say system of research, I really mean ecosystem. It's the organic system that has grown up out of those who inhabit it. It is not a natural order. It is not as it should be. It's as we have organically seen it grow. So if we were to think about this Umwelt in the context of sort of the major players in this system, what is their experience of this system? If you're a researcher, and of course, there's many permutations of researcher, basic, clinical, translational, big institution, small institution, company. There's many permutations of each of these categories, but they all have a little different reality. But what if we were to, and I'm not gonna go into quantum mechanics, but I put this quote up here as just it's a very interesting article if you want to read it. But the real kernel here is, what if we were to think about the relations between, that reality is determined by the relationships between these players, not by the discrete categories themselves. Does that make sense? I hope it does. So back to the translational wheel, and this, again, thinking about Umwelt, thinking about reality. I don't like the translational wheel as a metaphor. I've talked about it in the past. I talked about it in a presentation in our meeting last year, partly because it's for what it neglects to describe. One is that it's sort of a natural order thing. Here's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It goes like this. It's not reflective of an ecosystem. It doesn't account for time. I talked about that a little bit last year. Doesn't account for time like that's a graphic of the solar system speeding through space like a vortex. It's a wheel, but it's moving through time and space. It doesn't allow for forces, that translational wheel that you look at up on the far right. This is a graphic by one of our translational work group members, Murray Blackmore, some of you may know. And it was an attempt to describe some of the forces that are at play in this translational wheel. Let's say, for instance, an H-index, for those of you who are researchers. You're measured by things that have nothing to do with your discovery, measured by how well you teach, or how many students you have, how many students you graduate, where those students go, where you publish, how many publications, how many grants. Nothing to do with your research necessarily, unless you assume that all those things deliver good science. There are forces at play in this wheel that are not described. There's also another graphic. Thank you, Michael Lane back there. This was his graphic, asking the question of God, well, there's also levels of engagement of people in this system. There are scientists who are doing research who have no interest in translating anything because they're here for the science. They're really interested in the question of the science and the practice of the science. They really have no desire or interest in taking that science anywhere. Someone else was going to do that. There's levels of engagement for all of the players in this system. And then lastly, this reality, this Umwelt, this concept of how does everyone understand this wheel, this system that they are in? And some of you might have seen this. I've used it before. To describe this, I gave a presentation back a couple of years ago saying so for those of you who can't see those small little boxes, those are the major players: researcher, clinician, industry, funder, people with spinal cord injuries, regulators. Everybody's looking at a different win, a different target. How do I win? Different reality, I would say. And the question for us is, how do we get everybody to win? How do we align those targets so that everyone wins, not just one or two or three players? And so I want to propose to you a different kind of wheel, a concept wheel. A wheel that reflects a hub, which is spinal cord injury, people with spinal cord injury itself. The spokes of that wheel are the players in it that hold the wheel together. The wheel is how we get from A to B. The wheel is how we get from here to restorative treatments or improves quality of life. I mean, for me, it's curative treatments. Everybody in this room is a spoke in that wheel at some level. But the real key question is, in that wheel, how do you keep the wheel running straight? How do we get it strategic, efficient, and true? Like a bicycle wheel. For those of you who don't know, that's how you refer to keeping your wheel straight. It's true. You take it to the bike shop to true your wheel. Well, you true your wheel by maintaining effective tension on the spokes. And if the spokes are all the players in this room, researchers, clinicians, people with injuries, funders, regulators, industry representatives, there has to be effective tension on everybody in order to keep that wheel tight. That makes sense? Okay. So this meeting, that's Tommy Suter and Anita Kaiser. Like I mentioned, I think we've been fairly good at connecting researchers and people with injury, the Praxis Institute. And I know there's someone here, I can't remember her name, works on integrated knowledge translation. How do we understand language across these varied people? DOD, the SCIRT program, is actually also pretty good at bringing people with spinal cord injuries in to review proposals and create this kind of relationship. NASCIC, the North American SCI Consortium, is doing this work from an SCI perspective. Asia, and you'll hear from Lana a little bit later today, real concerted effort to get researchers and clinicians working together, collaborating together. But all of these, I would submit to you, are not sufficient. They represent a few different spokes, not all the spokes. And you can't true a wheel unless you true all the spokes, unless you keep and maintain effective tension between all the players and all their realities, all their Umwelts. So the question I have, and just so it's clear, I'm not answering anything. I want to provoke questions. I want to provoke discussion. You're not going to, at the end, you're not going to see a 1, 2, 3. This is how we get there. That's not what this presentation is, just to be clear. And more specifically, I hope that we have this conversation with many of you tomorrow in the workshop, the translational workshop. So one is, how do we think about this at a high level? At a high level, like organizations, consortia or consortium, how would you apply this principle? How do you maintain effective tension between all the players and all the players I've listed here, challenging one another? So it's not just the science saying to person with an injury, well, we're not there yet, or, we need more money or this or that, but everyone applying attention. Clinicians saying, you know what, we need this out of the science. Person with an injury saying, I need this from all of you, and so on. But also, Is it possible to do this in a local level? Is it possible to do this in a lab? Is it possible to do it in an institute? Is it possible to do it in a city where you create the kind of collaboration, the kind of relationships across all these players that fosters effective tension to keep our aim true and straight so that this translational wheel goes where we want it to go and goes strategically and efficiently there. And I think in order for that to happen, and you'll hear this a little bit, I think, from Dennis, who's following me, is we need provocateurs. We need people who, from, in a sense, outside that system, facilitate that effective tension, maintain that effective tension. Because I frankly don't think, and I don't think it comes from any one player. And so those provocateurs, in a sense, I'm sort of suggesting or asking each of you to think about, how can I be a provocateur? How can I promote that kind of effective tension as needed? And so this is the last little bit on that slide, or this presentation, since Emma's telling me I'm almost done. I suggest we need a target in order to do that. And moonshot, you know, is a common parlance. For anybody who's paying attention knows that's not the moon, that's Mars. We need a Mars shot. Now that's not easy. And I'll just quick go around. I know I'm running out of time. How do we get to Mars? What kind of science do we need to get there? How much money do we need? Not just do we need more money. I hear that all the time. How much do we need? How do people with injuries, that's my son, and just so you know, I'm not exploiting him, that's from his own Instagram account. When it was called attacking the standard, sticking himself out there. Okay, I'm out of time, but I'm going to keep talking, Emma, because I am. How do people with the injury get to determine what that target is and what it means to land there? How does a clinician see that target? How do they help deliver that target? What do they need to deliver that target? And industry, that little building, you know, it's like I don't know, some pharma company somewhere. How do they need it to be so that it's profitable and sustainable and disseminatable? And I would suggest that you need a bold target. That's why I put Mars up there. I think we need a bold target that engages everyone. I also think we have to look at that target and understand, as we make these decisions about what we need, what are the forces at play that keep us from there? And what are the forces at play that we can exploit to get us there strategically and efficiently? I also think, and I truly believe, and if you take home anything from this presentation, it's this. It's that we need effective tension between everybody in this room. And that means everybody in this room has to voice what is good enough. Is it not good enough? Is there something I don't understand that I need to understand? Help me understand it. Everybody needs to be that tension to keep this wheel true, or it's not going to stay true. And in order to do that, you need a collision of realities. Everybody in this room has a different experience of that reality, different experience of injury, different experience of the science, different experience of clinical practice. Neurosurgeon and PM&R doc do not see the patient in the same way. And that goes for everybody else, in my opinion. So we need to collide those realities in order for there to be effective tension. And lastly, and this is kind of it. This came from, and you'll hear again from Dennis. I should have explained a little more, as Dennis is going to come up after me. We did an interview a few weeks back with Melissa Miller from CDMRP, the SCIRT program. And we were talking about these themes, and Melissa said, you know, it's funny, she's in the military. I don't know in what, you know, she's a scientist, how she had to go through boot camp, or well, I don't know. She said, you know, this sounds like, the thing you're doing sounds like what we call the Army design method. And it was this, she described this process improvement method. If there's a problem in the military, who knows what it is? It might be battle, it might be like how to get Twinkies in the barracks, or I don't know. She said it's and she listed off some of the qualities of it, but the thing that was most important to me and the most striking was, it's not a like A through E and everything works. Like it's not an equation, you balance. And it was kind of, I think it was striking because it was coming out of the Army. Like I didn't expect them to be so existential. But she said, the way it works and the way it has to work is everybody in the process has to reflect on how they are being in this process, who they are, what they are bringing, how they are living in this change. And so I put that here because I think it's really important. Back to this concept of reality. It's important that you share that reality, and I hope you do in this meeting for the next 2 days and continue to do so. But it's also this question of, okay, how do I be? If I'm interested in a discovery, if I'm interested in a product, if I'm interested in a new clinical practice, if I'm interested in restoring function for myself or for my son, how do I be in this space to create the kind of tension necessary to keep our aim true, to keep our process true, and the system, this ecosystem we all inhabit, to do what it's supposed to do? I hope that makes sense to you. I hope I didn't lose you in some, woo-woo, voodoo, weird, heady stuff. But I hope it made sense. And I want you to think about it. And if you are thinking about it, come and talk to me. Now, since I've already taken too much time, thank you. I'd like to invite Dennis to come up. Hey guys, should I just close this? Hugo? Okay, thank you. Dennis, my friend from Case Western Reserve, you can read all that stuff in his information, is going to share kind of I hope a little bit of an extension on what I just talked about. But Dennis is a member of our translational work group, along with a few other people in this room. Welcome, Dennis. Thanks.
Just waiting for my slides to come up. I'm Dennis. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me, and I'm always excited to come to these meetings. And are they coming up? I'm hearing 1 second. So I'll begin a little bit anyway. So what I'm going to be talking about is a process that our work group engaged. You can imagine you bring a bunch of people together into a room to start talking about something. They're going to be bringing to bear their own experiences. They're going to speculate on what other people think, how other people operate, and that raises a bunch of questions. And we can be self-aware and say, well, maybe we're speculating. Let's test that. So trying to advance the slides. Does this work to advance the slides? Okay. I don't know what I just pointed to, that it's intermittently operational. And that's going to be an issue if I can't change the slides. Can I get an assist here? Thank you. Maybe it's a weak battery. Now I've lost the slides. Brilliant. Okay, I apologize for the inauspicious start. So I'll remind you that our work group's mission is to drive the delivery of restorative treatments for spinal cord injury by reimagining the therapy development pipeline, which is a very fancy way of saying we want translation to work for everybody and have some results from this. The goals for this inquiry, this interview process, were to assess the existing ecosystem of translational research that Matthew was just talking about. We want to understand the incentives and disincentives of each of the stakeholders, of everyone that's involved in that ecosystem. And we want to understand the relationships between those stakeholders. So what we did, I'll use a bit of jargon here and then I'll not continue with that. But if you want to look up, this is called constructivist grounded theory. So there's a way of doing qualitative research that we employed here. But this means Matthew and I were conducting structured interviews so that with individuals representing those stakeholder groups, they could tell their story in their words in their time. And we had questions to kind of move the conversation in the directions it needed to go. The stakeholders, to remind you, we're including people with spinal cord injury and their families, researchers, clinicians, entrepreneurs, folks in industry, funders, payers, regulators. Now, we haven't yet interviewed all of those groups. I will go through the 5 that we have. But there's a few assumptions that we may consider and test when we're considering this. Stakeholders will do what they're incentivized to do. So that's something we want to think about, like, why do we do what we do? And the ecosystem is going to be successful when every stakeholder is successful, to repeat what Matthew said a few minutes ago. One of the favorite questions that we asked, a favorite of mine, was, if we gave you a magic wand and you could change anything in that ecosystem, what would you change and what would that look like? So that really generated a lot of interesting introspection and conversation, and I'll bring up some answers that we got for each stakeholder. So I'll begin with people with spinal cord injury that were interviewed, so many here. And first, the incentives. And obviously, someone with spinal cord injury is strongly internally incentivized to see that translation happens, that there are new developments, right? So they want improved health and lifestyle. They want their wants and needs met. But there's also opportunities for fellowship, information, and resources. And that led into some of the challenges that they discussed. There were barriers to engagement, many different types of barriers to engagement. Sometimes it was financial, sometimes it was transportation, sometimes it was, how do I know who to talk to? What door do I knock on? And that leads to access to information and resources. So I know that a lot of groups are trying to address those challenges, and that's important. When we asked that magic wand question, a very common one was they would like, what if someone with power, money, influence got a spinal cord injury? Jeff Bezos? Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Yep. What if Jeff Bezos got a spinal cord injury? Right. So and sure, everyone felt a little bit, guilty for giving voice to that, but there's a value, there's a meaning behind that. Another thing that came up: individuals with spinal cord injury need to be included in this process. You want to have people that have skin in the game. And another one that I had to include because I like this: give politicians souls. I'm going to move on to clinicians. Their incentives, they want to help people. They have a specialization that they're passionate about. And they want to do research, a lot of them do. So I will say that right now, these incentives are kind of in order of how often we heard them, how much weight they seem to have. And certainly not all these themes will apply to everybody. But these are common themes you heard. The challenge is weighing benefits versus risks for trials. First, do no harm. So that was something that they would keep bringing up. Well, I want to see something that works. I don't want to harm my patients. And then the second one was bandwidth for research. So these are folks that are working many hours, working very hard. But they're in a system that is encouraging them to be focusing on treating, and carving out that time for research is not trivial. If they had a magic wand, they would address the profit motive for medical treatments. They'd like to see models that predicted human responses. Every time they see a rat study, they're thinking again back to, well, how do I consider what that's going to do for my patient, my human patient? And then incentivize outcomes as opposed to grants and papers. Again, that goes to what are those benefits? Move on to researchers. The dominant incentive that we would hear for the researcher internally, their own incentive would be discovery and innovation. They're into science because they want to understand the universe. They have productivity metrics. Their institution is going to be counting their grants and their publications and their teaching courses. And they have to, so that's an external incentive that affects their behavior. But they want to help people. And one of the things that we noticed is those individuals that had real interpersonal interactions with folks with spinal cord injury would document that as an incentive, that they want to have that impact in that area. Some of the challenges, do they have the skills and the know-how for translation? They may be very comfortable in their lab with their animal model, with their assay, their thing that they're doing. But it's a different skill set to take the next step. Maybe they don't have that skill set. Maybe it's intimidating. Maybe that's just not what they're incentivized to do. So it's not trivial. And there are silos. So this is a theme you'll hear a lot with the researchers. They're not engaged with the other stakeholders or each other as well as they could be. And we can talk a lot about that. If they had a magic wand, they would want to find partners to translate the work. They want to address those challenges. They want to incentivize the outcomes and not grants papers. They want to have that impact. Moving on to funders. I'm going to pause a minute so that our interpreter will catch up. Thank you. I apologize if I speak too quickly. Excellent. So the funders, they want to have that clinical impact. They want to see scientific innovation. And they do have to raise funds, some of them. So maybe if it's a government agency, they're getting tax revenue, but they still have to argue for their program. They will have to go in front of Congress. So the way they get their funds is not trivial, but they also want to invest those funds to have that impact. Several challenges listed that would come up. Knowing what was out there. Did they really know the field? And I can appreciate that that they were not arrogant. They're very open about. They try to go out to these meetings. They try to understand what's the cutting edge science. They talk to the researchers, the clinicians, the folks with spinal cord injury to try to answer that question as best they can, but they had acknowledged it's still difficult. They want to attract quality proposals. They want relevance to their mission for those proposals. And they want to have competitive and collaborative efforts with other funders, but that's a challenge. So if they had a magic wand, they would like to see an audit or a summary or a repository of something of the current knowledge and research in spinal cord injury. They'd like to see more data sharing. They would like to see more discovery. They'd like things to be more hands-off, and they would like to see more affordable clinical trials. They were acknowledging that these are just, if they could make a magic wand, make the trials inexpensive, that'd be great. And finally, having multidisciplinary teams that include all stakeholder input. They also want to see that wheel run through. Industry. So this will be the last stakeholder group I cover. They are, so profit is the lifeblood of a company. They have to make a profit. But there is a real drive for translation and collaboration here. And they do want to help people. So those folks that are working in that spinal cord injury space, they want to see that their thing, that their product or service is used, is valued. And so they can measure it in the dollars, but they want that to have meaning. Several of the challenges that came up. How do you find and evaluate new discoveries? You'll see some of these themes cross multiple stakeholders. The costs and risks of clinical trials. And one of the things that we were concerned about is we would hear that that spinal cord injury is a small population. It's not profitable. But when we talk to folks in industry, they say, well, that's not stopping us. There is a business model for this. So they rejected that notion that it's not profitable enough. It's not a big enough market. It is. They also brought up the difficulty in replicating research findings. This goes again back to data sharing and what's out there. So if they had a magic wand, they'd also like to see that summary, that audit of the current knowledge and research. And they'd like to see more coordinated approaches to industry, with industry, academia, foundations. So I'm going to blast through these very quickly because it would take me hours with open discussion with everyone to go through a bunch of the things that kept on coming up. But I want to go through these quickly, and this is my last slide. Some common things that came up across multiple stakeholders and multiple interviews. Who determines the research priorities? Who assesses the risk? If you're going to try something, it's going to be a clinical trial. Who decides if it was risky? How do you know it's out there? How do I identify what's quality research, quality work? People want to be bold. We heard this a lot with funders and individuals with spinal cord injury. Be bold. Focus on a meaningful impact. Access and inclusion. We want to see tension in these folks. How do you support an ecosystem to achieve that? Better communication. And I know that we have presentations today and tomorrow that will talk about that. Innovator versus champion. This is very important. This goes back to the provocateur topic. And there's a very different skill set between coming up with a radical idea and then nurturing that idea and shepherding it. Spend the money more efficiently. So they're not asking for, we can always want more money, but we also want to be efficient with what we've got. This came with a lot of regulatory inefficiency. I also want to point out that for all these things that come up, it doesn't mean they're right or wrong. It's just the things that are on people's minds. Big data sharing, researchers' individual accomplishments versus SCI accomplishments. So this is an issue where, let's say I'm a researcher and I've got some discovery, some project I really care about. I've wrapped my identity into that a bit. If something better comes along, am I willing to let this go and work on the better thing instead? The appropriateness of animal models came up a lot. The risk and expense of clinical trials. The advances could be applied to other disorders. So this is a number of folks that interviewed were thinking about, well, if you can rebuild the nervous system, imagine what that could do for other indications. So, and finally, personal connections to spinal cord injury matter. So this is going to be the last point I'll make before I step down. Anyone that we had talked, so the research to whom we spoke, the folks in industry to whom we spoke, of them, the ones that had personal interactions with people with spinal cord injury. And I don't mean just going into a clinic and saying, okay, yes, these are a bunch of patients getting treated. I mean the ones that were hanging around with the same person several times, building a friendship. They develop this internal incentive that drives them into their work, and they do care. And so there's a very meaningful interaction to be had there. And I'll leave you with those thoughts. And I think we're doing discussion later, so thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Now I'd like to introduce you to Quinn, who's making her way up here. Some of you know Quinn. She's a board member of United Fight Paralysis, has a spinal cord injury. And I just want to take a quick second just to make sure you understand least what we were hoping to try to convey in this session. So I started with this, I don't know, you might think weird conception of reality and the shared reality that we have. Dennis then talked very specifically about some of the work that we did to listen to the realities of others. Quinn now, hi, is going to talk to you about more specifically our community, spinal cord injury community, and that reality. And in a sense, what I think of, and I think she'll talk about this a little bit in the title of her, it's the divide, right? Yeah. Okay. That our community is, it's not easy to define a target. It's not easy. It's not a monolithic. Sometimes the SCI community is thrown around as if it's all one thing, but it's not. And Quinn's going to talk about that in a variety of different ways from her own experience and from her own work. So please welcome Quinn. Thanks.
Whoa, can you guys hear me okay? Cool. Hi, thank you for having me. Okay, cool. Where does it go? I have to go. Oh, there we go. Thanks. All right. A little about me. I worked as a climbing ranger in Rocky Mountain National Park. Essentially, my job every day was helping lost hikers find their way back to their car, carrying visitors out with sprained ankles to more severe injuries in technical terrain, cliffs, mountainsides, to body recoveries. On my personal time, I traveled the world establishing first ascent on far-flung mountains and running around doing speed ascents, those kinds of adventures. I was outside all day, every day. In 2017, I took a big climbing fall in Yosemite National Park, and I landed here in the SCI Club. Before my injury, I guess my reason for running around was I liked pushing myself physically and mentally in the mind and also in my community of female athletes, setting records and standards in that way. So in 2017, here we are after a spinal cord injury, still having to push myself physically and mentally. And in 2021, I endeavored to do one of my first bigger adventures since my injury, to become the first person to hand cycle the Great Divide mountain bike route. This is a 2,500-mile path, mostly dirt roads and a little bit of single track and a little bit of pavement. The Great Divide separates all of the water that runs towards the Pacific Ocean from the water that runs towards the Atlantic and the Arctic Oceans and the Gulf of Mexico. It starts way up in Alaska and runs all the way through Western Canada and the US along the Rocky Mountains down through Mexico. This is water that touches everyone in the Western United States. This dividing line drawn on a map inherently creates boundaries, the height of the land between the watersheds. It does not follow the highest peaks. It's just the easiest path for the water to flow. All right, so what does this geography lesson have to do with us, U2FP, scientists, and the community members, people with disabilities? Well, while I was on this ride, head down, and my mind wandering over 2,500 miles in 25 days, a little light bulb went on in this tiny head of mine. There's a great divide in our society and in our community and about many topics that pertain to disability. How we are divided in our advocacy of care versus cure. If we are just advocating for cure, we are labeled hopeless romantics, essentially. Aiming for something that will never happen isn't possible. Society has this perception that SCI is hopeless, and in part it's because it's misunderstood and misrepresented. I mean, even in our daily media still today, we are displayed and portrayed as in hospital wheelchairs. If we were to see an amputee with a peg leg, a wooden peg leg, the community, everyone would laugh, because we know that it's dated in a false perception. But yet our community is still perceived in this way that is incorrect. Okay, great. And then there's my initial reason to being involved with United Fight Paralysis, my frustration upon entering this SCI community and seeing that misrepresentation and how it has affected our research and our funding, how science isn't even given a shot because it's deemed far-fetched. Can we play this little video? Do I have the control of that? We're racing each other. Too bad there's no sound. Yeah, so that's my community member, Jason. We met at Craig Hospital, and we both were quite disappointed, I guess, with where we were at with spinal cord injury and technology. And of course, then there's our daily frustrations about actual accessibility. This bike ride across the country re-emphasized what I love about wilderness and the natural environment, and how I can tour the country from Canada to Mexico and be successful, but I still can't go get ice cream. Can we go play? Okay. So our natural environment, I noticed in the towns and the cities, of course, we have these laws, these ABA and ADA, and we're ticking the boxes, but they still don't work. And I think it's also the way society deems it as here, you've been given this thing and it should work and you'll be fine. But what I noticed, I guess, in the wilderness, or what I love about wilderness and these adventures, is the community around these adventures. We make it happen. We try hard. And we step outside the box, this little ticking boxes, and it might not be deemed accessible, but we actually make it work. And yet where the built environment continues to fail us. So maybe one day it'll change. Uh-oh. All right, great. The Great Divide is an imaginary line on a map, but it reminded me of the delicate balances that we need to navigate between the cultural models of disability, advocating for and maintaining a sound system for our own daily needs, getting to and from the grocery store, managing our daily cares. The water falls onto the earth and curiously flows in either direction. It evaporates and lands again in a different spot, and then it chooses to go curiously either way. And so it doesn't have to be, the water touches all of the land. There is no divide, I guess. It doesn't have to be care versus cure or nature versus built environment. It is care and cure, physical and balancing the hope of tangible change. Advocating for laws to meet access to be equal in our cities and our bathrooms, and to have inclusive access to the outdoors. This great divide actually isn't a divide at all. It's all encompassing. And here's a little video of doing the Great Divide. I guess all this blabbering to say that all of us in this room are attracted to the far-fetched ideas and trying hard. We have to, as a person with a disability, and our daily life requires it. We are making progress by sharing our personal stories and advocating and staying curious with one another and connecting with one another. We are flowing not just the buts, but we are doing the ands. The work is hard, but we are slowly eroding the dividing line and having an impact. Thank you all.
Dennis?
Is this thing working? Who's the new guy up here? My name is Jason Stouffer, and I am a white male with receding hairline. So I just cut my hair off about 10 years ago.
Receded.
It's done receded. She gone. Anyhow, let me introduce myself to you really quickly in a way, or even why I'm here. I'm the moderator, so I'm keeping everybody under control. Oh, I forgot to say in the description of myself, I'm in a wheelchair. I have a spinal cord injury. So I'm moderating, which means I'm keeping everybody under control. Nobody's allowed to get too aggressive or fighty or anything like that. Not that I expect that to happen. But my introduction to you for what I'm doing today is because in 2019, I went to Cleveland, it was called Working to Walk then. And I sat similar to you folks at these round tables, and I heard a lot of talking at me about high level concepts and various things. And I remember I had a lot of questions brewing in my mind as to what am I hearing and how do we make this real? One question that I asked specifically after, I think it was a roadmap presentation that Matthew did. What was festering in my head was, well, now what is the plan? Then how do we get there? What is the strategy? There's often the model of the AIDS activists who gathered together and they organized, they understood their injury, and they weren't going to stand for no progress. So that's my introduction as to who I am, why I'm here. That actually, now I work for U2FP. I do podcasts with Matthew and several other things, errand running for the organization. But my question or my suggestion to you, now that it's question and answer time. You've been talked to this whole time. You might have questions brewing in your head. You want to know what's going on. And now is the time to start to tap into those. We want this to be interactive. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and ask these folks questions about their presentations, try to get some clarity out of them and see where it goes. So yeah, I'll just open it up. I guess what we'll do is maybe raise a hand. We've got some microphone runners. And so if you will raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you for you to ask these important questions.
More comments?
We have a question on the left.
Yep. Ignacio. Hang on. Right here.
Good morning.
Morning.
So how do you cure spinal cord injury? And what can I do to help in this process as a stakeholder?
That's a big one. Just went right to it.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
I'm gonna take a stab first. I think that what Matthew introduced and what I think what Quinn and I were also talking about is with the current ecosystem, the current structures we have, the way the stakeholders are interacting, we are going to continue to move at what a lot of us feel is a slow pace. It's difficult to have an environment that encourages innovation toward impact, translating that with clinical trials that are well designed, and then things that look like they're working, have them taken up and advanced along. So what we're talking about is fundamental shifts in the structure for how these stakeholders interact with each other, so that we can take on something as significant as cure. So a lot of us are in research, will look at maybe parts and pieces of things. But then so one example I'll give is, if you've got myself and another researcher, and we're looking at the nervous system from two different points of view, we should be collaborating. We should be. What stops us from doing that? There's probably added value from the two of us working together to combine our visions and our understanding. And so we've been, the work we've been doing over the last couple of years in this work group is to understand the answer to that question of, well, what stops us from talking just among researchers? And there are, to answer your other question, what can you do? Being in the room with the other stakeholders and advocating makes a very big difference. One of the things I maybe said earlier that was clumsy, but if I talk to I'm probably considered a researcher, so I'll stick with explaining it that way. If I'm a researcher that was trained up to be a biochemist, okay, and I know about my biochemistry tools, why do I apply that to spinal cord injury as opposed to any number of other things? If I meet someone with spinal cord injury and I think, yeah, I want to take my tools and focus on that, that makes a difference. And that's one of the stories that we were seeing, is you have someone trained up, but they could be focusing on those clinical impacts. And that's true for the clinicians, industry, funders. Everyone should be hearing what you have to say. And there should be a seat at all of those tables.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'll fight you.
I am moderating.
I fenced yesterday. I got this. I think one of my greatest disappointments when first in the hospital was the lack of education that our community was receiving. And I think that is detrimental to this progress and moving forward. And so as a community member, we need to step up and educate ourselves, but help to educate and advocate for our whole community. We need to be a louder voice, a stronger voice, and a clearer voice. And so providing that and doing that, I think, is a huge step. We need to come together, yes, with the researchers, but we need to come together with one another.
I agree.
So I want to also say it's kind of related to what I presented earlier, but it was something that I wanted to throw in there that I didn't, as I was running out of time. I gave a presentation a few years ago, and I quoted a friend of mine in Minnesota. He's a TBI researcher, neuroscientist, and he said something to me where we're having coffee. I meet with him every now and again, and he said, you do realize that the system of research that we have currently is not built for what you want from it. It's not built for a cure. He said, and I've used this quote a bunch, he said, right now it's incentivized for scientists to ask conservative questions and make bold interpretations. Saw a headline a couple days ago that's reflective of that. Very conservative result, bold interpretations all over the media. Happens all the time. What we need, he said, not me, he said, we need a system that incentivizes bold questions that makes conservative interpretation. And so the reason why I say that is back to what I said earlier, and I want to emphasize, this is not a personal indictment of anyone. It's not I don't trust anyone in this system. I don't trust myself. I don't trust researchers. I don't trust industry. I don't trust any one single player. What I trust is all of us together transforming that system, not changing somebody's intention or their practice, or, it's not about individuals. It's about how this system works, or this organic system, not natural order, how we have allowed it to grow and be, requires all of us from these different sectors to transform it so that it can be built for what we are looking for, not low-hanging fruit and wait 50 years for something bold, but something bold that we can build this system so that it incentivizes all the players within it to give us what we need.
And I want to follow up on that. And I know we've got a couple more questions. I know we've got a question over here as well, but I do want to go with the flow of what you just said, that it's not one of us, it's all of us. And you're seeing folks up here on a platform speaking into microphones or whatever, as if we have answers for you. But the truth is, Ignacio, like, I'm interested in your opinion, because you have your perspective. You are sitting in that chair the same I'm sitting in this chair. We are experts in our lived experience. In your opinion, what have you seen that is a barrier? What can we be doing? What are your thoughts about how we can get to this goal of functional recovery? We're using that word, but cure is kind of like the Mars thing, but functional recovery is on our way there. What is your opinion? Because I would love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. Can you hear me? There you go. Absolutely. Big question. So just a tiny bit about me. Life has put me through a lot of challenges. I was born in Cuba, 1990, one of the worst times ever to be born in Cuba. My mother passed away from leukemia at 4 years old. At 6 years old, I packed everything, which was barely anything. My dad and we won a visa lottery, came to the US, 1997, 7 years old, moved straight to Atlanta. Grew up with this dream of becoming a fighter pilot, because that's what I wanted to do. That flight over from Cuba really instilled in me this passion of becoming that fighter pilot of X, Y, and Z. I had my reasons why. And the accident happened 2012, December 2012, motorcycle accident, as I was training to become a fighter pilot with the Air Force. And a shift happened in my mind of using that passion, that devotion, that energy, that commitment to becoming an Air Force officer, to now becoming a scientific researcher myself, so that I could become that fighter pilot for translational biomedical breakthroughs that are changing the world, not dropping bombs elsewhere. And I say a lot of times that my purpose found me at that moment when I opened my eyes after being in a coma 3 months, sustaining a TBI, SCI, and a BPI, and waking up at Shepherd Center and trying to find which way my way was going to be. So in these last 9 years, become a scientific researcher myself, got a master's in biomedical engineering, got now another master's in kinesiology. I've been working with Dr. Reggie Edgerton out of UCLA for 2 years now. And what I can say, it's that it's a collaborative approach. First and foremost is instilling in the community of individuals with lived experience how imperative it is to never let your mind become paralyzed. We can be paralyzed as physically as we could be. I myself, with those 3 neurological injuries, found myself as paralyzed as ever. But I never let my mind become paralyzed. And maintaining our health, I think it's one of the main things that I'm trying to promote through the research and the things that I'm doing is how can we be as ready as we can be for when that cure finally comes about. But I had a 1% chance of ever recovering any function after that accident. And little by little, year after year, intervention after intervention, I've been trying to accumulate a little bit more and more of those percentage points and increasing that percentile. Right now, as we speak, I'm being stimulated through a transcutaneous electrical stimulator right here next to me, part of the clinical research that we're doing in Los Angeles. So I'm trying to integrate myself as both a researcher and someone with lived experience so I can get through all those barriers, because that's where I found my best area. So I saw all those barriers from the very beginning. And I said, well, the best way to get rid of all that is to use the self-experimentation model of the scientific method on myself. I'll become the researcher. I'll test things on myself, and I'll go through all the other bull crap. So
Yeah, I love it, man. We appreciate all the context, and all of us are taking notes. Really appreciate your thoughts. We have one more question, another in-person question over here. I think there's a mic, and then we've got a couple virtual platform questions as well we'll get to.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, guys. Great start to the morning. I just wanted to ask a quick question. I think as advocates, we're very good at telling the story about what's in it for us. Everyone in this room can tell you what's in it for us. But what's in it for them? Are we good at that? Are we good enough? Because they're not here.
Can I, just a clarifying question, when you're saying as advocates, we are easy at saying, it's easy for us to say what's in it for us, but who is the them that you're referring to when you say what's in it for them?
Joe Biden, Elon Musk, any of the people that are going to help us.
Sure.
So I tried to get at that question in my presentation with the slides toward the end of the blue arrows, right? That I do think, and I don't know if it's a complete answer to your question, Perry, but to me, I think what's in it for everyone else is, don't you want to win? Like, don't you want a real win? Like, not just a win. I mean this again within this system that we have currently, that 2 or 3 representatives can win. And I mean win like gain stature, notoriety, money, status, attention, can be a hero in this field. Or a company can walk away with millions of dollars, but not a sustainable product for people with spinal cord injuries. There are ways to win. But the only way everyone satisfactorily wins is if everyone wins. And I think that's good enough. I mean, you all tell me. I don't know.
So is that our problem then? We're not clear enough about winning. We're not clear enough about what's in it for them. Because I can tell you a million things about what's in it for us, but what's in it for them? Like, what's the win? Why would other people care about this? And it's just goodwill. It's just, someone with a lot of money goes, oh, well, here's all my money, but what's in it for me?
Right. So I can speak rather, I think, concretely to some of that. So when we interview these different individuals, some of them will tell us, this is what I'm incentivized to do. This is what is a win for me. So it may be that I want those patents grants papers. It may be, I want to have I want to be treating my patients for something that's effective. So through those interviews, we've been documenting this is what they're supposed to do, based on who they think their boss is, but also what they want to do. And we could say, okay, we'll try to align things so that you're doing what you think you're supposed to do. But we also want to give you what you want. And one of the things that we'll probably even talk about it more tomorrow afternoon, some ideas for what a new system could look like. We're gradually developing recommendations and a vision to address that very thing. That's a very good point you're bringing up.
Looks like we have a question on this side of the room, the green jacket. Oh, you have it. Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me? On?
Yep.
Yeah, it's a comment actually. Hi, Quinn. It's Candace Floyd. Nice to see you in person. So, I am, I guess, one of them. I'm a researcher. I'm currently run a spinal cord injury lab at the University of Utah for about a week more, and then I transitioned that lab to Emory University in Atlanta. And through this conference, I just wanted to talk about this because we haven't talked about it yet, but through this conference and through others, Quinn and I have met, and Quinn and Dr. John Gensel and I and some others, we worked on a application together that was a really groundbreaking application. And Quinn's input in that grant application was super important for us to develop a really great research design. That application did not result in, it turned out to be a dead end for us, right? For a lot of reasons we don't talk about here, we can talk about later. I also wanted to say that we've met, I've worked with several folks from this organization to put together some collaborations that would never have happened without this organization. That are collaborations that are cure-based research, I'll say the C word, that are looking at chronic spinal cord injury and combination strategies to restore function. And those are from, researchers that I had not previously collaborated with. Everybody brought tools to the table in the research space. I'll talk about some of the ones I brought to the table later this afternoon. And Matthew and others here, Sam and others, brought together groups of spinal cord injury organizations to fund this research that could not have been funded in another way. So I just wanted to give you those two examples of them. I'm a person who's a them, trained classically, brought up through the system, NIH reviewer funded. I have one of those CVs that has all those students listed and where they are and every publication and every talk. And I'm a tenured professor, and that's how I got there, by turning in this 40-page document that lists everything I do. But what I really do, what I really want to do, is the types of experiments that we're able to do with the input of the group of the folks in this room. So I just wanted you to hear a story that says that this works. I think it really can change from within and can build programs and procedures that will drive the spinal cord injury research forward. And advocacy was a critical part of that effort.
Candace, that's a great example. Thank you so much for that inclusion of the stakeholders coming together to have a successful end. I do want to clarify though that we are them. I mean, so this whole point about this wheel and the tension among the wheels is we're all them. So, and then we have our own perspectives, which make us an us. So us and our gains and whatever. So you're not, I think that's.
Just to jump on that really quickly, and then we'll get to the live stream question. Perry, also, when I said I don't trust myself and I don't trust our organization, it's in that same way. Like I do trust us, but not alone, right? Because what I've told our staff a lot of times is the day that our programs become our mission, we should close up shop and walk away. And I should go sell cars, because
You do really well at that, by the way.
that becomes, right, an advocacy organization who is only committed to next year's fiscal cycle and raising money and being successful as an advocacy organization, if that's your goal, then right, you're winning, but not winning for our community, right? So just because I'm a father of a kid with a spinal cord injury and I'm passionate about it, doesn't mean that I can't lose my way, right? And be more invested in how we look, or how we raise money, or how many staff we have, or how many meetings do we get invited to, right? This is all garbage, because our mission is to help cure paralysis, right? And I think that's applicable to everybody else. And so that question is back to, well, okay, well, how do we define a win? And how does everybody punch their ticket? Because if everybody doesn't punch their ticket, it's not really a win. Sorry.
Don't
We
be,
are that- we
don't
are
be
that
sorry.
too,
Don't
even
be
though-
sorry. We have 1 minute left, which is super unfortunate because there's a lot of great questions and responses. But we're going to take a question from the virtual audience in the back.
Okay, this question comes from Anita. Anita asked, which spoke in the wheel is the most loose and needs tightening? And she followed that by a comment of, there is a systemic issue where institutions need to shift from tracking only researcher success by number of grants and papers to including knowledge translation, implementation, and impact.
Well, I would quick say, just, I don't want to answer the question necessarily, I'll open it up, but sometimes it's not which spoke is the most loose, it's which one is the most tight. Which one is pulling all the pressure on the wheel? Maybe that's, I mean, it's equally important question. I don't know, throw it out to y'all and everybody in the room.
I'm going to address the second part of the question, and this is where I'm going to get provocative. I don't think that I don't think the current academic model for research incentivizes the researcher stakeholder well to go for impact. So researchers want to innovate. And right now with the current academic model, they are incentivized to go for the metrics that get them tenure, and it's hard to take risks in that model. So that's a very astute thing to be considering as that on that spoke. And I'm trying to be a little bit careful with how I word that.
I'll speak quickly to that as the moderator. But I think when you view this wheel perspective, it's saying, okay, well, how many for U2FP at least, what might be if we were to try to identify which spoke maybe needs the most attention, given this idea of, hey, look, we need like the attention on all the spokes to have this wheel running smoothly, or else, it's not going anywhere. I think we're pretty good at making researcher contacts. I think we're pretty good at making advocate contacts. I think we're pretty good at making clinician contacts. But maybe as a way to look behind the curtain here, we can probably be doing better on the industry side of things. It's this idea of industry, it brings in a lot of stuff like, the FDA or Social Security or health insurance, and who's gonna wind up taking this stuff down the road and bringing it into our community. So for us, I'll just say, I would like to see us be increasing our industry contact, that spoke, and maybe because it's just so much easier to talk to everybody else.
All right.
So I think that's it. We're at time. We're gonna take a break until, I think it's 11. What is it? 11:05. Go ahead, Sasha.
Sure. Go ahead. Sasha's cutting into your break time.
So-
Just want you to
Sorry,
know
just,
that.
just,
Yeah.
no,
That's right.
2-3 minutes, sorry. And this follows up at Ignacio's statements, and thank you for being so courageous for doing all those things, and announcing to us all the things that are available that you've done for yourself. I just want to point out that directly to your question, what we can do is, I've been in this game for 37 years. I pretty much represent all the stakeholders that you're talking about. I'm a scientist, I'm a researcher, user, and an advocate. The fact that you're here, the fact that we're all here, especially those with disabilities, is to me astronomically important and very, very welcoming. I've been trying to do this for decades, literally. And the fact that you're in this room, there's a lot of questions and perturbance and why isn't this? But the fact that we're here is a demonstration that the system that we're calling flawed is being recognized and that we're here discussing this. And so I don't have the answers like you all. If I did, in the back of my pocket, I would let you know. I have implants. I have every kind of intervention also over the years. I don't profess them. I just try to learn myself. But it's time now that we all, Ignacio, like yourself here, talk to the researchers, talk to the clinicians about not necessarily what they should be doing, but look at what's happening. And then they can maybe pick up on that. So I applaud everybody's efforts here. I'm now deeply involved with this organization, aside from my daytime job. And I think it's important because we need to shift things. I've been doing this and seeing the same things for 37 years. And it's not that things haven't improved. There just seems to be at every spoke of the wheel, some kind of impotence that needs to be toned. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. It's a good one to end on. Okay, you guys are free for a
Go
little
take
bit.
a break. Remember, thank our sponsors. Thank them at the table. Thank them if you see their whatever this is called, ribbon, their ribbon lanyard. And we'll see you back at 11:05.